Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you all for coming out, or kind of, so to speak, right? Um, and it's so good to see all those wonderful smiling faces. It's like, oh my gosh, there's a whole world out there that we're not interacting with. So it's great to see you all. Um, I have to say, I found this preparation for telling my life story quite daunting. Because every time I started down one path, I said to myself, no, I better go that way. And then I go that way, and I think, well, if I go that way, I got to go that way. So it took a lot of thinking time and processing time. So when you start looking at your life, and when you're old, like I am, there's a great, great, huge expanse, and there are a lot of things that have gone on. So I picked out some things that I thought were very important to me and very important to my development as a person, and some things that were very difficult, and some things that I thought were highlights of my life and career. So I'd like to start out by just telling you that I was born in Rochester, and basically grew up primarily in Rochester. And I went to Ben Franklin High School, and I went to number 21 for an elementary school, and that happens to be the same school that we built our playground in. So, you know, every time you turn around, there's a little connection to something somewhere. The neighborhood that I grew up in, I would call, is quite significant in my development. It was what we might call a blue-collar neighborhood. And at the time that we lived there were primarily immigrant families living in that neighborhood, and they were primarily Italian immigrants. You know, if you go down the street, there's the Russos, there's the Micos, there's the Mangionis there. So, and then eventually a few other families started to come in. There were German families that came in. There were then eventually some Black families moved in. And then there was a lot of movement into the Rochester area from Puerto Rico, and there were a lot of Puerto Rican people and Puerto Rican families. So it was a very diverse neighborhood, and it was really a lot of fun. And as I look back on that neighborhood, I think it really had a fair amount to do with shaping my interest in other people and my sense of wanting to be a part of something. And while there were other Italians and Germans and so on, I'm Lebanese. There were no Lebanese. That kind of was probably one of the difficult things for me, because I wasn't like anybody else. You know, I was Lebanese, and there were no other Lebanese around me, and there were none in the neighborhood, and there were none that interacted with my parents. So that kind of was a hallmark for me in terms of my identity. The sense of always being different, the sense of not belonging. So that kind of followed me through my life for quite a while. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about was to move away a little bit from my background. And I wanted to talk about my parents' background, because that obviously had a significant impact on who I was, some positive, some very negative. But I think it's helpful, it was certainly helpful for me to get a broader perspective of who they were, how they lived, and what were some of the beliefs and some of the values that they had, that they brought with them. The values that I certainly didn't follow, that I think probably made life very difficult. So my parents were born in Lebanon. They immigrated to the United States. My father came in 1921, and he came as a bachelor. He was here for 7 or 8 years, pretty much on his own. And I think he really made good use of the fact that he was a single man, very sharp and quite the dandy. as a bachelor in Rochester. He came to Rochester because he was a tailor, because of the fashion and the clothing industry in Rochester. The one thing I could say about my father with unequivocally is that he was the most amazing designer and tailor. He could make anything from kids' pants to women's dresses to men's suits, and he made many of our clothes as we were children. I have many pictures of little outfits that he'd make for Elaine and I and my brother in suits that he would make. Just a very talented, creative artist, of which I got none. But anyway, so after he'd been here probably for about 8 or 9 years, he went back to Lebanon and to get married, solely to get married. And he married, obviously, my mother, who was 19 years old at the time. He was 35 years old at the time. So it was a real disparity in terms of age and in terms of life experience. But anyway, she got on a ship with him, and they came and landed in New York City literally the day after the market crashed. And so he had great hopes of opening a tailor shop and dry cleaning and whatever. That was his goal, but their timing wasn't very good. So he never really got to do what he wanted to do, although he worked in the clothing factories around Rochester for many years. So in Lebanon, there are many different religions in Lebanon. The majority of the people are Maronite Catholic. Then the next large group are Muslims. And then there are probably 16 or 17 religious minorities in Lebanon. And that's a whole story in and of itself. But my parents belonged to one of those religious minorities. They were Druze. It's D-R-U-Z-E, at least that's how we spell it here. And the majority of Druze people now today live in Lebanon and Syria and Jordan and Israel. In fact, in Israel, one of the characteristics of Lebanese people, I think, and especially of Druze people, is that they tend to become a part of any community that they're in as long as they are together. And that's a real hallmark of the Druze people, is that they're quite insular. You don't step out of that boundary of being a Druze person, because as soon as you do, you lose your identity, you lose your protection, you lose your sense of community. At least that's the mindset. So I included it here to talk about it because that mindset had a great impact on my life. But before I talk about that a little bit, I just want to tell you a little bit about the belief that the Druze have. So the Druze were originally Muslim way back in the 1st or 2nd century. They broke away from being Muslim, from the Muslims, for all kinds of reasons. And so Muhammad is not their prophet. The prophet, so they're an offshoot of Islam. And it's important to understand that a lot of the Middle Eastern beliefs, certainly about women and about women's roles and so on, came with my parents. So that part was part of the Druze religion. But it was interesting as I was reading a little bit that so Muhammad is a prophet, Jesus is a prophet, and their prophet is Jethro. Now that's a biblical name I did not know. but the story is that Jethro had five or six daughters, and one of his daughters married Moses, and Moses and Jethro were very close, and they really helped each other a lot. So there's a lot of biblical stories around that, and there's a lot of controversy about whether that's a true story or not. But that is, Jethro is the religious leader or the religious founder of people of the Jewish faith. So a little bit more about that, because it really ties into how I grew up, how we grew up. It's not easy to determine what the Jewish people believe in religiously. Some reason there's a secretive kind of mentality around it. Actually, it's actually kind of a secret. But some of the beliefs are that God, there is only one God, and that in fact, the Druze people refer to him, to God, and I say him, it could be him, her, it could be a multitude. They refer to him as al-Tawhid, which means people of Unitarianism and monotheism. So the whole idea of our being Unitarians and breaking away from the idea originally of the three parts, the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. I look at that, our Unitarianism, as just one, and that their conception of God is he is almighty, he is omniscient, he is transcendent, he is immanent, he is all over. And because of that belief, the Druze people do not assign any attributes to God or Allah, because every time you add something to try and define who Allah is, you can't, because Allah is everything. And in a way that helps me to understand. My mother always made the connection that she used to say, oh, you Unitarians, you're just like the Druze. And part of why she used to say that was because of the sense of awe, I think, that us as Unitarians have of the universe, and our respect and our love and our not knowing but appreciating and honoring and respecting the universe was very was very similar to theirs. So I think that's why she always did that. Now, one of the paramount principles of the Druze is reincarnation. That's one of their main tenets, and if you are born into the Druze faith, you are Druze forever. And so when you are reincarnated as a Druze person. You never cannot be Druze. So right there is I think a key thing for me to understand, and that is that sorry, I was afraid this was going to happen. Is that once you are born, that really talks about the fact that you're not going anywhere. And then the other beliefs about being Druze had to do with you stay in your community. You stay within the boundaries, within the walls of your community, of your village, of your people. Nobody can convert from being another religion into being a Druze person. And if you marry out of the Druze religion, which every one of us 5 children did, if you marry out of that religion or that practice, then you're shunned. You really broke the ties. You're tainting the blood, so to speak. So a very strong clan mentality. So how that affected me, so my parents come to this country, and there are 5 children within about 7 or 8 years. So she had 5 children under 8 years old, boom, 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 boom. And so she brought with her, my mother brought with her, as my father did, all of these beliefs about, we're in this country, we're in this different country, but you are not going to be like all these other people here. So there was always a push and a pull that, they're pushing to make us do what they wanted us to do. They're pushing to make us believe what they believe. And then their mode of being parents were that kids don't know anything, quote unquote. I make the decisions for you. I tell you what to believe. I, meaning my mother and father, I know what's best for you, and I will talk for you, and I will take away any sense of self-identity you have, because you don't have any identity separate from who we are. So that turned out to be a very, very, very challenging, difficult part of my life. That constant striving and straddling 2 cultures, and never knowing which one you belonged in, dying to belong with everybody else, and yet having these people just kind of shove us to their beliefs. So part of why they were so strong and so together on how they brought us up is that they were first cousins. So that was another way that the Druze people remained so insular, is they married within their villages or their towns, and if that meant marrying cousins, they married cousins. So they were first cousins, so they came with those cultural beliefs, so which made them even stronger, because they both had those cultural beliefs. So there was no dynamic that was positive for us. There was no place for us to turn except to try and fight through these things that they were pushing into us. The fact that they were cousins, they were first cousins, and they have 5 children. There's 5 kids in my family. There were 5 children. My oldest brother, Kamal, died at 50 years old, unfortunately. And then I have my second brother is Carl, and Carl is sweet, kind, smart, scientist, talented. And then there's the twins. So we're always referred to as the twins. And that's another thing about identity, is like, oh, okay, so are we really alike? No, we're not anything alike. We look alike. We have the same cough, by the way, for those of you who know us. But we're not the same. We have very different temperaments. So in terms of there being 5 children and 2 parents, there's salt. I always thought of us as kind of an island, but a safe island, just like being in a Druze village, right? And then when my father died, and then my brother died, that was a very traumatic thing, because that family system of mother, father, and 5 siblings was very strong, and it was a very taut family system. So when my brother died, and he was the oldest, and he was kind of the kingpin, that whole family system that was so tightly pulled together just kind of broke. And I think in a way it was good, and it was obviously tragic, but I think it pushed pushed us a little bit more, those of us that remained, into trying to really continue to be who we were, without all the ties of that system. So I can write a book about each one of us kids and how we developed. So let me see, what else do I want to tell you about? I think that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about in terms of the my parents' background. If there's anything, they made us into very strong people, you know. So we were fighters, and we were impacted by it, but we pushed through it. And I would skip now to talking about my siblings. I'm not going to talk a lot about my siblings, except I'm going to just mention that, and you all know that I'm an identical twin. You know Elaine. And I think that being an identical twin was to me another search for identity. You know, who am I separate from her, and who is she separate from me? And how do you get people to understand that we're nothing the same. We're not the same people. We do look alike and have a lot of our genetic makeup is identical, but we're quite different. But yet it is a gift. It is a gift because there is no one who I'm closer to, and there's no one who kind of quote unquote watches over me like she does, or I watch over her. It's fun. She can make me laugh hysterically, and I can't stop, and I can make her laugh, and that's usually in inappropriate ways or in inappropriate places that we can get into constant giggling, or one look. I'm sure all of you have that, perhaps, or many of you with a sibling, you know, one little look or one little glance and you're gone, right? So in fact, very often, one funny little story was the Druze people in the United States used to have a convention every year, and that's another way of all the Druze gathering together from all over the country, and the young people, and get the young people to know one another so they might get married together. And then at one convention we were at, some of the elders, who are the keepers of the faith, so to speak, were giving a lesson on to talk about the Druze religion. And so Elaine and I went, and I remember saying to her, and this was years ago, I remember saying to her, I said, now when we're sitting there, don't you dare touch me. Well, of course, there's the signal, right? So I'm sitting there trying not to close my eyes, and all of a sudden I feel these fingers crawling down my leg, you know. So, you know, we just got hysterical, and then the woman behind us got hysterical. So that's the kind of relationship that we have. I think I'm very lucky to be a twin. Nobody could push my buttons better than she can, and nobody can push hers better than I can. Probably two huge life-changing happenings in my life were the death of my oldest brother, and then, of course, the death of my husband. My oldest brother, I talked about that family system thing crashing in, and now how do you define yourself? And Jim's death was kind of like, and many of you are widows, I know. It's kind of like Humpty Dumpty. You're sitting on a wall, you're pretty confident, you're having a good time, and then you fall, right? And your life is splashed into a million pieces, and you have to figure out how to put it back together. So I did, and as many of us do, and moved on. I have two children. I have a son who's about to be 50, which is hard to believe, and a daughter who's going to be 48. They're the joys of my life. I have 8 grandchildren, which they're a piece of the joy too. I went to Brockport. When I went to Brockport, it was not a part of the SUNY system. It was a state college. It was Brockport State Teachers College when I went. And when I left there, I became a teacher. My first year of teaching was actually at number 1 school, which is right down the hill on Hillside Avenue. So it was a good year. I couldn't hurt those kids because they were so bright. So we had a great time. We had a great time. And I kept contact with that first class that I taught probably for 30 years afterwards. They were just great people. I didn't teach that long. I got married and we had our children. And then that was right about the time of the mid 60s to late 60s and 70s. And that was the women's movement. So that was a huge formative time in my life. That was an amazing time for experiences and for growth. And one of the things that came out of it, there used to be an organization called the Women's Network, Rochester Women's Network. I think it still exists. Amazing networking and amazing people. And it was really kind of the beginning of women just finding their voice and standing up and doing all kinds of things that just created an amazing opportunity for people like me who were a little reticent. And out of that, I became a career counselor. The Women's Career Center was started probably in the early 70s. And so I worked there for many years. I became a career counselor, just fantastic. And probably the joy of being the career counselor, one of the joys was that out of that, I met probably my lifelong best friend, Mary, and we used to develop all kinds of programs together, and we looked for a job together. So we eventually got hired at the National Technical Institute for the Deaf. And what's significant about that in terms of difference, and probably one of the things I'm very proud of, is that we job shared. So we were one of the first groups that actually took one job and had 2 people doing it, because we both had young children. So she would work 2 days a week, I would work 2 days a week, and then we'd overlap 1 day a week. And we got a lot done. We made a lot of contributions. We developed amazing training programs for employers all over the country. We taught job skills to the kids at NTID. Really promoted the understanding of integrating deaf, hearing impaired, or hearing impaired people into the work environment. So that was a great experience. And out of that experience, while I was at NTID, I got my master's degree in organizational development and training, and I went on to have a corporate career in training, organizational development, change, all that stuff. So I've had some wonderful experiences. And then the other really cool thing out of working at NTID is I made many very, very close friends. And so now Mary and I and 2 of the people that are friends of mine from NTID, we see each other all the time. We call ourselves the Vintage Chicks now. So so we've had many years together. It's funny, as I'm sitting here looking, I see Joy Collins down there, whom I haven't seen in a while. So Joy and I used to do a lot of work at church together. And we did work in we consulted together in organizational development and organizational change. So it's fun to see her there. We had a lot of fun. So I think that's pretty much what I want to tell you about myself. I've had a great life. I've had an interesting life. I've had a challenging life. Church, by the way, has played a tremendous role in my life. Many opportunities for growth, many opportunities for learning, many opportunities for being a part of a community. That's something I have always longed for. And that is something certainly I get from being a member of First Unitarian. And I see all you people here. I love you all because I see you around so much. You're just a part of my life too. So thank you for being here.